Now, President Obama told us in the media this morning to watch ourselves, to refrain from getting ahead of the investigation about the attacks in New York and New Jersey and Minnesota. You know, the commander-in-chief, the leader of the free world, very busy man, he generously took time out of his day to boss around private enterprise, and I know we all thank him for it. Well, CNN was only too happy to comply by applying their own form of censorship to Hillary Clinton when she accurately referred to the attacks as bombings. They edited out the word bombing while also criticizing Donald Trump for using that exact same word to describe the attack when law enforcement officials, they said, had not yet used that exact terminology. First of all, this is what it actually looked like.
I've been briefed about the bombings in New York and New Jersey and the attack in Minnesota. Obviously, we need to do everything we can to support our first responders.
And this is how CNN edited it.
Obviously, we need to do everything we can to support our first responders, also to pray for the victims.
As you can see for yourselves, CNN censored the first sentence about bombing. Joining me now, history professor and author of Obama's America, a transformative vision of our national identity, Ian Reifowitz. Ian, hi, how are you?
How are you? I'm fine, Liz.
I'm doing well, thanks for asking. Ian, this was almost funny to me because the candidates in this case said almost exactly the same thing. They both called it a bombing. They both talked about the victims. I really had no criticism with the initial response from either candidate here. But CNN, news media, they're supposed to be unbiased. They focus on the fact that Donald Trump was, in their opinion, too hasty calling it a bombing, even though, and they focus on the fact that Hillary Clinton said, let's wait for the facts. But both candidates said that, Ian. Both candidates. They're painting it how it wasn't actually happening.
Liz, I think you're right here. I think CNN did a bad job. I don't think it makes for good journalism to edit out one part of a statement. And obviously, you're not going to always roll the whole statement, but to edit out one part of the statement and then make a judgment about the other candidate for using similar language. I mean, I did see that Mr. Trump said a bomb went off in New York, and Mrs. Clinton said, I was briefed about the bombing. So maybe it's a little bit more, for lack of a better word, bombastic for Mr. Trump. But I do think the fault here is with CNN.
Right, excellent pun there. No, this is one of those cases, and I would agree with you. Sometimes you don't use a whole clip because the entirety of it is not relevant, but I think this would be described as deceptively edited, to use Democrats' own terms. And I think this is pretty clear to people on both sides of the aisle, non-political again, that this attack in New York, the attack in New Jersey, and the knife attack that happened in Minnesota, all of them do seem to be tied to radical Islam in some way.
I haven't seen as much about the Minnesota incident, but I do know there was a person captured in New York who appears to be Muslim and of Afghanistani origin. So, I mean, I think that's pretty clear. I mean, I think in terms of CNN, we really do have a big story here because we actually have what it looks like a media outlet doing something out of the ordinary to favor Mr. Trump over Mr. Clinton, favor Mrs. Clinton over Mr. Trump. That's pretty surprising. That's almost man bites dog.
Right. I don't know if it's surprising. It's not surprising in the sense that it's always shocking, never surprising from that network. But another part of the media narrative here when it comes to the radical Islamic ties here, the attacker in Minnesota was a Somalian national, I believe, maybe a United States citizen. We're not sure about those details yet. But he talked about Allah during his attack and even asked one of his victims before he stabbed them whether or not they were Muslim before he continued his attack. So there's some clear ties to his own religious ideology there. But the strange part of this to me is that there are activists right now marching in Minneapolis. They say they're protesting Islamophobia. And Ian, I don't understand this because in I think what would be the common sense worldview here, it's not Islamophobic to say out loud that the man who waged this attack, talking about Allah, asking his victim whether or not they were Muslim, that's not Islamophobic to say that it's tied to radical Islam.
No, I agree with you. That's not Islamophobic. I think, we can look at a couple of things here. One is the way presidential candidates and presidents talk about the issue. I think it's smart tactics for an American president to avoid using words that the experts have judged are counterproductive for us to use. And that's the argument Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama have made. If they, in their hearts, believe that this is radical Islam, but their advisors saying, don't use those words, it'll get more Americans killed, I'm perfectly happy to have them avoid using those words. I did see the Islamophobia, the anti-Islamophobia protest, and I think it's a smart idea. Just as we ask mainstream Muslims to distance themselves from people who commit terror in the name of Islam, I think it's a nice idea for us non-Muslims to distance ourselves from hate against the broader Muslim community. It's a smart thing for all of us, I think.
Right. I just think it's rather ill-timed in the sense that, of course, we all oppose hate speech. We all oppose crimes against Muslims here. But what about the outspoken support for these victims? I mean, particularly because these victims survived these attacks. They're now going to be dealing with a trauma of being stabbed or attempting or experiencing a bombing, I should say, for the rest of their lives. What about the solidarity there? But I'm not sure I agree with your point about the use of radical Islam. And it is true, Hillary Clinton said just last week that she doesn't use that term because she believes it plays into the hands of ISIS, that's what the terrorists want. But I don't think we have any proof that saying those words plays into their hands. We don't see retaliatory killings here in the United States against Muslims.
Well, actually, we have a couple of points. One is if the president and Mrs. Clinton are saying that the advisors are saying that, I'll take them at their word. I don't see why they would have any reason to lie about it. If anything, it would help them politically to say the words radical Islam. So if you're doing something that's against your interests, I think there's usually a pretty good motive behind it. And actually, according to a report released recently, I think it's out of San Bernardino, hate crimes against Muslims spiked significantly in 2015. They're up to the highest level since 9/11. So I think it's always good to stand against hate, whether it's hate committed by Muslims or whether it's hate committed against Muslims. I think that, I'm happy, we're all happy that the people in Minnesota have survived. I don't think it hurts them to, if they even know about it, that there's a rally against Islamophobia. I can't see why it would hurt them.
Right, and I can't speak to that study specifically. I haven't seen the one, I haven't read the one that you're talking about, but I do know that those types of studies that document hate crimes, that's a very subjective term. So before I could comment on that, I'd have to look up what they used to define that. But in terms of violent crimes and murders, I know that the proportion of that against peaceful Muslims here in the United States is nothing compared to the violence that radical Islamists wage against peaceful Americans. Ian, it's always great to talk to you to get another perspective. Thanks so much for joining me today. Our final tipping point of the night, a few things President Obama forgot to mention to ISIS. Well, I'll take over from here. That's straight ahead.